I have been a judge for 38 years. I have seen liars cry. I have seen guilty people walk free on technicalities. I have watched powerful men sit across from me and smile because they thought their money made them untouchable. But on March 14th, 2025, at exactly 10:22 in the morning, a woman walked into my Los Angeles courtroom, and by the time she sat down and opened her folder, I knew this case was different. Her name was Deja Williams, 39 years old, a nurse, a single mother, a daughter. Her neighbor had blocked her driveway with his car. Now I know what you're thinking. A blocked driveway? That's a parking fine. That's a 2-minute case. That's not even worth a full hearing. But here is what you don't know yet. He didn't block it on a random afternoon. He didn't block it by accident. He blocked it on the one night when Deja needed to get her mother to a hospital. And her mother died. I want you to stay with me through this entire story, because what started as a simple civil case in my courtroom turned into something none of us in that room were prepared for. By the end of that morning, there was an FBI arrest in my courtroom. There were federal charges, and a man who thought he was smarter than everyone in the room was taken out in handcuffs right in front of the woman he tried to destroy. But before we get there, let me take you back to the night of February 19th, 2025. It was almost midnight. Deja Williams had just finished a double shift at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She works the overnight cardiac unit, the floor where people come in at 2 a.m. with their hearts failing, and she is the one keeping them alive until the doctor arrives. She had been on her feet for 16 hours straight. She came home, checked on her 10-year-old son, Marcus, and went to lie down. Her mother, Gloria Williams, lived with her. Gloria was 72 years old, a retired school teacher, 34 years in the Los Angeles school system, a woman who knew every child on the block by name. After a stroke 2 years earlier, she couldn't live alone anymore, so Deja brought her home. At 11:47 p.m., Deja woke up to her mother calling her name. Not the normal confused middle-of-the-night calling. Something different, something wrong. Deja told me right here in my courtroom, in the steadiest voice I have heard in 31 years. She said, "Your body knows before your brain catches up." Gloria Williams was in respiratory distress. She was struggling to breathe. Deja called 911 at exactly 11:49 p.m. The dispatcher told her 12 to 15 minutes for an ambulance. She ran outside to clear the path to make sure the paramedics could get to the front door without any problem. And that is when she saw it. Her neighbor's silver Chevrolet Tahoe parked directly across her driveway, not halfway, not slightly, over, completely blocking the entire entrance. No ambulance could pull up. No stretcher could get through without going around the block and coming through the back alley. She ran to his door. She pounded on it. No answer. His lights were on. His TV was flickering in the window. She could see the glow from the street. She called his phone. He picked up. She told him her mother was dying. She begged him to move the car. She was shaking. She had just come off a 16-hour shift, and her mother was struggling to breathe 20 feet away inside the house. Craig Howell, 58 years old, retired city planner, her neighbor of 11 years, said this, and I am reading directly from the police report. "I'll move it when I feel like it. Learn to park your own car right." Then he hung up. Deja ran back inside to her mother. She called 911 again, reported the blocked driveway. The dispatcher rerouted the ambulance through the back alley. It added 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The paramedics arrived. They navigated around Howell's car in the dark. They loaded Gloria Williams onto a stretcher and got her to Cedars-Sinai at 12:09 a.m. She was in critical condition. 46 hours later, Gloria Williams died. She never regained full consciousness. Deja held her hand for every one of those 46 hours. Her son Marcus sat by his grandmother's bed and read her the books she used to read to him when he was little. She was 72 years old, a retired school teacher, a grandmother, gone. And when Officer Sandro Reyes arrived at Howell's door that night to ask him to move his car, Craig Howell stepped outside, looked past the officer, looked directly at Deja standing on the sidewalk and said, I don't know why they call police every time you ask them to do something they don't want to do. These people, I want you to hold on to those two words. Because in this story, those two words are going to cost Craig Howell everything. But here is the question nobody was asking yet. And it is the question that changes this entire story. Was this an accident? Or did Craig Howell know exactly what he was doing that night? Stay with me, because the answer is coming. And it is worse than anything you're imagining right now. Most people would have let it go. I have been on this bench long enough to know that. Most people swallow the anger, bury the grief, and move on. Because fighting takes energy that most people do not have after losing someone they love. Deja Williams was not most people. 3 weeks after burying her mother, she walked into a city clerk's office and filed a formal civil complaint against Craig Howell. Negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, obstruction of emergency medical access. She also filed a city code violation under Los Angeles, Municipal Code Section 8606, illegal blocking of a residential driveway. She did this while working night shifts, while raising her son, while grieving. Craig Howell hired an attorney, a man named Gerald Finch, civil defense lawyer from Culver City. Expensive suit, the kind of lawyer rich people hire when they want problems to quietly disappear. Howell contested everything, all of it. He called it a parking mistake. He said the fine was excessive. He said the civil claims had no basis. His attorney filed 3 separate motions to dismiss before we even had a hearing date. But here is what Craig Howell did not count on. Deja Williams had spent 12 years as a cardiac nurse. Do you know what cardiac nurses are trained to do better than almost anyone? Document, chart, record, date, time, detail, every single thing. Because in medicine, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. She applied that same skill to this case. When she walked into my courtroom on March 14th, she had a folder, not a stack of loose papers, not a handful of screenshots, a tabbed, organized, dated folder with every piece of evidence arranged in chronological order. The 9/11 call log, 11:49 p.m., call placed. The dispatch rerouting record showing the back alley redirect and the added 4 minutes, 30 seconds. The paramedic supplemental incident report filed by Officer David Reyes, 9 years on the job. His exact words: obstruction of residential driveway by neighboring vehicle directly impeded emergency medical access. Situation was avoidable and dangerous. Timestamped photographs of the blocked driveway taken at 12 a.m. Her phone records showing the call to Howell at 11:52 p.m., duration 41 seconds. The police report signed by Officer Sandra Reyes documenting the incident and Howell's statement. She had everything. When she sat down across from Craig Howell and his expensive attorney in my courtroom, she looked calm. She looked prepared. She looked like a woman who had decided quietly and completely that she was not going to let this go. I called the case. I let Deja present first. She was precise, clear, no unnecessary words. She walked me through every document, every timestamp, every detail, the way she would chart a patient's overnight status. When she got to the part about her mother, about the 46 hours, her voice dropped slightly, not breaking, just quieter, like she was protecting something that mattered. I noted it. I noted everything. Then it was Craig Howell's turn. His attorney stood up and argued it was a parking mistake. The fine was too high. The paramedics' report was opinion, not medical fact. The civil damages Deja was seeking were wildly excessive for what was, he said, a minor neighbor dispute. A minor neighbor dispute? That's what he called it. I let him finish. Then I looked directly at Craig Howell and I asked him a simple question. I said, Mr. Howell, did Miss Williams call you on the night of February 19th? He said, yes. I said, did she tell you her mother was having a medical emergency? His attorney put a hand on his arm. Howell shook it off. He said, and I want you to hear this carefully, he said he believed she was exaggerating. He said that in his experience, People in that neighborhood called emergencies when they wanted something and didn't want to ask nicely. In that neighborhood, I set my pen down. I said, Mr. Howell, a 72-year-old woman, a retired school teacher, your neighbor of 11 years, and your response at midnight when her daughter told you she needed an ambulance was to decide she was exaggerating. He started to speak. I held up one hand. I said, I'm not finished. I turned to his attorney. I said, show me proof this vehicle was parked before 9 p.m. He shuffled papers. He did not have it. I said, show me any evidence your client was asleep and unaware of this call. He could not produce it. I said, your client answered a phone at 11:52 p.m. He was awake. He was aware. And the words he used, documented in a signed police report, were, I'll move it when I feel like it. Do. You dispute that report? Silence. I looked at Howell. Do you dispute it, Mr. Howell? He said, I dispute the characterization. I said, the characterization of your own words. Now, I have been doing this for 31 years. I have heard a lot of bad answers in this courtroom. That was one of the worst. But what happened in the next 10 minutes was something I was not prepared for. And neither was Craig Howell. Because here is the thing about people who have been getting away with cruelty for years. They get comfortable. They stop being careful. They say things they should not say. They do things they should not do. And sometimes, just sometimes, the right people are listening. I was about to deliver my ruling. Craig Howell was sitting back in his chair with that particular expression, the one that says, I'm annoyed by all of this, but I'll pay the fine and be gone in 20 minutes. His attorney was already closing his folders. And then my clerk walked up to the bench and handed me a folded note. In 31 years, I have received notes during proceedings, scheduling conflicts, procedural issues from other chambers, medical emergencies in the building. I have never received a note like this one. I read it once. I read it a second time. I looked up at Craig Howell. He was checking his phone under the table. The note was from Special Agent Monica Tran, FBI, Los Angeles Civil Rights Division. Here's what it said, and I'm going to give you the summary because the full version is 3 pages of federal language. The FBI had been investigating Craig Howell for 6 weeks, not because of Deja Williams, not because of the blocked driveway, because of 4 other complaints. 4 other incidents over the previous 3 years involving Black and Latino residents on Ridgecrest Avenue and the surrounding 2 blocks. 43 calls. That is how many times Craig Howell had called city agencies and law enforcement in 36 months. 43 documented calls, all of them targeted, all of them aimed at non-white residents, noise complaints against neighbors who weren't making noise, reports of suspicious vehicles that turned out to be residents parking in front of their own homes, a code enforcement complaint about a Latino family's backyard structure, a structure that had full permits and had been standing for 9 years. 43 calls in 3 years, using the city's own systems as a weapon, quietly, patiently, every single time someone who didn't look like him moved onto that street. That alone would have been a federal civil rights case. But here is the part that made my clerk go pale when she read it before handing it to me. 3 days before the night of February 19th, 3 days before Gloria Williams went into respiratory distress, Craig Howell had made a phone call to his adult son. The FBI had that call, obtained legally under a surveillance warrant that had been in place for 5 weeks. In that call, Craig Howell said, and this is from the federal affidavit, word for word, the old woman next door is getting worse. The daughter's going to need to get her to the hospital soon. I'm going to make sure that's as difficult as possible. Read that again. 3 days before Gloria Williams collapsed, 3 days before Deja pounded on his door at midnight, 3 days before he told her he would move the car when he felt like it, he had planned it. He was not sleeping. He was not careless. He was not having a bad night. He was not confused about where he parked. He knew Gloria was sick. He knew an ambulance was coming soon. And he put his car in that driveway deliberately because he wanted to make it harder for a dying woman to get to hospital. That is not a parking dispute. That is not a neighbor conflict. That is not a civil code violation with a $250 fine. That is attempted murder, depraved indifference to human life. That is the legal standard. When you know someone's life is in danger and you take deliberate action to reduce their chance of survival, that is what the law calls it. I sat with that note for exactly 45 seconds. I kept my face neutral. I kept my hands flat on the bench. 31 years of practice means you can read something that makes your blood run cold and show nothing on your face. I called a 5-minute recess. I went to my chambers. I called Agent Tran directly. She confirmed everything. She told me the federal arrest warrant had been signed that morning by a magistrate judge. 2 agents were already in my building. They were waiting in the hallway outside my courtroom. She told me the charges: federal civil rights violations, 43 documented incidents, willful interference based on race, and added to the warrant that morning based on the recorded phone call and the documented delay to emergency services attempted murder. Depraved indifference. I asked her one question. I said, "Are you ready to move right now?" She said, "Yes, Your Honor, the moment you call it." I hung up, I straightened my robe, I walked back into the courtroom. Craig Howell was still on his phone. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to him. And here's the thing I want you to understand, the thing that I have thought about many times since that morning. Craig Howell had spent 3 years being very careful. 43 calls over 36 months, slow enough to seem like complaints, not a pattern. Quiet enough to avoid attention. Smart enough, he thought, to stay on the right side of the line. But he made one mistake, one single mistake that undid all of it. He made that phone call to his son. He said it out loud. He said, "I am going to make sure that's as difficult as possible," and someone was listening. I walked back into that courtroom, and every person in the room felt the shift. I don't know how to explain it except to say a room knows when something has changed. The air changes. People sit up straighter without knowing why. Craig Howell did not notice. He was still on his phone. I sat down. I waited for the room to settle. I said, "Before I deliver my ruling, there is a matter that requires this court's immediate attention." I nodded to my bailiff, Officer Dennis Park. 9 years working my courtroom. He reads me better than most people read books. He moved to the door without me saying another word. The doors opened. Special Agent Monica Tran walked in. Behind her, another agent, both in dark suits, both with credentials out. Agent Tran walked directly to the defendant's table. She did not walk quickly. She did not rush. She walked like someone who has done this before and knows that slow and calm is more powerful than fast and loud. She stopped in front of Craig Howell. She held up her badge. She said, "Mr. Craig Howell, you are under federal arrest. Please stand." The courtroom went completely silent. Howell looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at his attorney like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was a misunderstanding. His attorney jumped to his feet, started talking about due process, about procedure, about the impropriety of a federal arrest in a civil proceeding. He was talking fast, the way lawyers talk when they are panicking but trying not to show it. Agent Tran waited for him to stop. Then she said very calmly, "Counsel, your client is being arrested on a federal warrant signed this morning. You are welcome to call your office. He will be processed and arraigned. You will receive full documentation within the hour." Then she looked back at Howell. She said, "Please stand, Mr. Howell." He stood slowly. His face had gone the color of paper. The expensive jacket, the polished shoes, the phone he had been checking 2 minutes ago, none of it mattered now. All that was left was a 58-year-old man standing in a courtroom, realizing that the version of the world where he was untouchable had just ended. Hey, if you are watching this right now, pause for 1 second. Where are you watching from? Drop your seat in the comments right now. I want to know how far this story has traveled. People are watching this from all over the world, and honestly, that matters to me. This story deserves to be seen. If you have not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Because I have 4 more stories like this one coming this month, and you do not want to miss a single one. Okay, back to Craig Howell. Back to my courtroom. Back to the moment his world collapsed. Agent Tran cuffed him right there in my courtroom, in front of his attorney, in front of the gallery, in front of Deja Williams, who had been sitting in her chair this entire time, completely still, watching. As the agents walked him toward the door, Howell turned around. He looked at Deja. He opened his mouth like he had something to say. I said, "Mr. Howell." He stopped. I said, "Don't." He was escorted out of my courtroom at 11:47 a.m. Exactly 12 hours after Deja Williams pounded on his door begging him to save her mother's life. 12 hours. To the minute, I noticed it. I don't believe in coincidences, but I believe in timing. The courtroom erupted the moment that door closed. People were standing. Deja's hands were over her mouth. My clerk was on her phone. Even the attorney, Gerald Finch, the expensive suit from Culver City, was sitting with his head in his hands. I called order. I got it. And then I delivered my civil ruling. The parking code violation, guilty. Maximum fine. Negligence upheld in full. The documented 4-minute and 30-second delay caused by Howell's vehicle directly impaired emergency medical access, confirmed by 2 separate incident reports, signed, dated, uncontested. Intentional infliction of emotional distress upheld. His words on that phone call, combined with the FBI's evidence of premeditated intent, established deliberate and willful cruelty toward a neighbor in crisis, maximum civil damages, awarded in full to Deja Williams. I also stated for the record in open court that the complete case file, including the FBI's investigative findings, was being referred to the Los Angeles Human Relations Commission, the State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, and the United States Department of Justice. Then I said something that I want you to hear. I said, this court finds that the actions of the defendant on the night of February 19th, 2025 were not careless, they were not accidental, they were deliberate, they were racially motivated, and they had fatal consequences for a 72-year-old woman named Gloria Williams, a retired school teacher who deserved every possible minute of medical care available to her. The courtroom was absolutely quiet when I finished. I looked at Deja Williams. She was looking down at the table. Then she looked up at me and she nodded, not in celebration, just acknowledgement, the quiet kind, the kind that costs something to give. Craig Howell's federal trial took place 7 months later in the United States District Court for the Central District of California before Judge Raymond Park. I followed every day of it. The prosecution laid out the case in order, clean, methodical, devastating. First, the phone call. 3 days before the night of February 19th, Craig Howell told his son, the old woman next door is getting worse. The daughter's going to need to get her to the hospital soon. I'm going to make sure that's as difficult as possible. Played in open court, for the jury, for the gallery, for the cameras. 14 words that ended 11 years of getting away with it. Second, the 43 calls, presented one by one. Noise complaint dismissed, no noise found. Suspicious vehicle, resident's own car. Code violation, fully permitted structure, 9 years old. Suspicious persons, residents coming home from work. 43 calls over 36 months. Every one of them targeted, every one of them against a non-white neighbor. 3 residents from Ridgecrest Avenue testified. A black family, 6 noise complaints in 2 years, all filed by Howell, all dismissed. A Latino couple, their guests reported as suspicious persons multiple times in a single year. A young black man stopped by police 3 times in 4 months after Howell called them. Every stop documented, every stop 0 charges. Third, the medical evidence. A physician testified about the clinical impact of the 4-minute, 30-second delay. He was careful with his words. He said the delay reduced Gloria Williams's chance of survival by what he called a clinically significant margin. He said that in cases of respiratory distress in a 72-year-old patient with a prior stroke history, 4 minutes, 30 seconds is not nothing. It is everything. The defense attorney, not Gerald Finch anymore, he had quietly withdrawn from the case, argued that the phone call had been taken out of context, that Howell had meant he would make the parking dispute difficult, not the medical emergency. The jury listened to that argument. Then they listened to the call again. The old woman next door is getting worse. The daughter's going to need to get her to the hospital soon. I'm going to make sure that's as difficult as possible. Now I want to tell you about the twist, because here is where the trial took a turn that nobody in that courtroom expected. On day 4 of the trial, the prosecution called one final witness. Howell's own son. His name was Brandon Howell, 32 years old. And he had done something that nobody, not the defense, not his father's attorney, not Craig Howell himself, knew was coming. He had gone to the FBI voluntarily. 6 weeks after the arrest, he had walked into the FBI's Los Angeles field office and asked to speak to Agent Tron, because Brandon Howell had not just been on one phone call with his father, he had been on several, and he had kept them all. Brandon testified that his father had been talking about the neighbors on Ridgecrest Avenue for more than 2 years, that the conversations had escalated, that his father had talked about the neighborhood changing and said he was going to do something about it, that after Gloria, Williams moved in with Deja. His father had mentioned her multiple times, calling her the sick old woman and talking about how long she had left. And then Brandon Howell said the line that made the entire courtroom go silent. He said, "My father called me the morning after Gloria Williams died." And he said, "See, problem solved." Craig Howell's attorney objected. Judge Park overruled him. The jury heard it. 3 words, problem solved, said the morning after a 72-year-old woman died in a hospital. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. Guilty on every single count. Federal civil rights violations. 43 incidents of willful interference based on race. And attempted murder, depraved indifference to human life. Judge Raymond Park stood up and delivered the sentence. 10 years, federal prison, eligible for parole at 68 years old. His city pension revoked. His professional credentials permanently stripped. His home on Ridgecrest Avenue seized as part of the civil judgment. The proceeds placed in a trust for Deja Williams and her son Marcus. He lost everything. The house, the pension, the reputation, the freedom, all of it gone. As the marshals walked Craig Howell out of the federal courtroom, a reporter in the gallery asked Agent Tran what made this case different from the hundreds of civil rights cases she had worked. She said, "He thought he was invisible. He thought slow cruelty doesn't leave evidence. He was wrong. Slow cruelty doesn't leave evidence." I wrote that line down when I read it the next day. I have thought about it many times since. After the federal verdict, I heard from Deja Williams. She did not send a letter. She did not call my clerk. She showed up at my courthouse on her day off after a night shift and asked if she could speak to me for 5 minutes. I said yes. She sat down across from me in my chambers. She looked tired, the kind of tired that does not come from one bad night, the kind that comes from 2 years of carrying something very heavy. She said, "I need you to know something. When I filed that civil complaint, I did not think it was going to become what it became. I needed to do something. I needed Gloria's name to mean something in a room where someone had to listen." I told her it had. I told her it always had. She told me that Marcus had asked her the morning before my civil hearing whether she thought it was going to matter, whether anything was actually going to happen. She had promised him yes. She said, "I didn't know if I was telling him the truth. I just knew I couldn't say no." That is the part of the story I keep coming back to. A mother promising her child that the system will work when she has every reason in the world to doubt it. That is not a small act. That is an act of faith that costs something real. And Deja Williams extended that faith while working night shifts, while grieving her mother, while sitting across from a man who had said these people like she and her family were a problem to be solved. Now, here is what happened after the verdict. The Los Angeles City Council sent Deja Williams a formal letter of commendation. The FBI presented her with a civilian citation. The nursing staff at Cedars-Sinai, the people who work alongside her at 3 a.m. when someone's heart is failing, took up a collection for Marcus's college fund. People across the country, after the story went viral, donated to a fund set up in Gloria Williams's name. It was supposed to be open for 30 days. They closed it early. By the time it closed, it had raised $231,000. Marcus Williams made the honor roll the semester after his grandmother died. Deja framed the report card. She put it next to Gloria's photograph on the mantle. The house on Ridgecrest Avenue, the house where Craig Howell had spent 11 years using 43 calls in one car and 2 words to try to push people out, was sold. A young family bought it. On the first day, they knocked on Deja's door and brought her a plant. I do not know if I believe in science, but I thought about that one for a while. Now I want to talk directly to you, because this story is not just about Deja and Craig Howell and one block driveway on one terrible night. This story is about something that happens every day in neighborhoods across this country, quietly, slowly, in ways that are designed to be invisible. Craig Howell did not use a weapon. He did not use violence. He used phone calls and parking spots and towards these people, and he did it slowly enough that any single incident looked like nothing. A noise complaint, a parking issue, a code enforcement call, nothing to see. And it worked. For 3 years, it worked, because most of his neighbors, exhausted, busy, not wanting the trouble, let it go, until Deja didn't. And here is what I want you to take from this story. The reason Craig Howell ended up in federal prison with a 10-year sentence was not because of a dramatic moment. It was not because of one shocking thing he did. It was because one woman, tired, grieving, working night shifts, raising a son alone, refused to let one thing go. She filed a complaint. She built a folder. She showed up at 5 a.m. to prepare. She sat in that chair and told the truth, document by document, until there was nothing left to dispute. That is what justice actually looks like. Not the dramatic arrest, although that was something, not the federal trial, although that mattered. Justice looked like a folder, tabbed, organized, dated, carried into a courtroom by a woman who had every reason to stay home and didn't. I have been on this bench for 31 years. I have watched powerful men leave my courtroom with everything they came in with because nobody was prepared enough to challenge them. Craig Howell left my courtroom in handcuffs because Deja Williams was prepared. She told me before she left my chambers that day that the hardest part was not the trial. It was not the hearing. It was not even sitting across from Craig Howell and hearing him say, "these people," in a police report. The hardest part, she said, was the night Gloria died. Sitting by the bed and knowing that 4 minutes and 30 seconds had been stolen from her mother deliberately by a man who had looked at her family and decided they were a problem. She said, "My mother taught school for 34 years. She knew every child's name on this block. She deserved every single minute she could have had." I told her she was right. She stood up. She thanked me. She went home to make breakfast for Marcus before her next shift. That is Deja Williams. That is what courage looks like when it is quiet. And Craig Howell, who thought slow cruelty was invisible, is sitting in a federal prison cell right now, 68 years old, before he sees daylight again, because he was wrong. One woman with a folder proved it. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. I want you to do 3 things right now. Subscribe, hit that button, because I have more stories coming and every single one of them matters. Comment, tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what this story made you feel. Tell me if you know someone like Deja Williams, someone who refused to let something wrong go quietly. I read every comment, everyone. Share this. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because Gloria Williams was a school teacher who knew every child on her block by name. Her story deserves to travel further than one street in Inglewood. Thank you for being here.